Well, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, good ever what time of day it happens to be that you're listening to the Tattoo Teacher podcast. On the episode today, I have an amazing designer, educator, design ethicist, everything bundled into one. Nila Rezaei. I hope I've pronounced that right.
Yep.
Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks, Phil, for having me, and great to see you.
Yeah, it's great to be face to face. Now, all our interactions has just been online through email and LinkedIn chats.
That's right.
I first came across your work in an ABC story. Now, after I read that, I went back and did a little bit of more of a search and found some more information out. And I've seen some of your other work, but the story that I saw and that just sort of inspired me to contact you was Crafted Liberation. It was a story in the ABC. It was about your journey tied into your heritage,
Yes.
to a political view, to the plight of women, not only in your home country but around the world,
Yeah.
and then sport,
Yes.
all bundled into one. So, could you firstly tell us who you are and like what you do, or like why do you so that people know why I've actually got in contact with you?
Yeah. Yeah. So I am, I guess, if I were to describe my practice, I would call myself an industrial designer or a product designer. But actually, my journey into design wasn't specifically industrial design. So I finished high school back in Iran in early, when was it, 2010, 2009. And then I moved to Australia to study design. And I always knew that I wanted to study design. Now, it changed over time. Sometimes it was fashion design, sometimes it was, I don't know, graphic design. And then I didn't know, and then it was architecture at some point. Anyway, so while I was researching, and I always wanted to sort of move overseas to study design. And while I was researching, I came across this degree in Australia at UNSW called a Bachelor of Design, and then you can choose your majors later. And I thought, oh, perfect, I'll just go for that one because then I can be a bit more flexible. So I ended up going to UNSW Art and Design, and I studied a Bachelor of Design, majoring in object and jewelry design. Now, I've always been really interested in sort of this material culture and physical making. So making has always been a part of my practice. So I'm not trained as an industrial designer, but I ended up working pretty much when I was still at uni. I ended up working at an industrial design studio, and that became sort of my official role, industrial design. But what it just means is that designing physical products and objects with a view, with a sort of with an approach of getting them manufactured so they can be used in the real world. And it just worked perfectly. I just didn't know about industrial design when I applied for these degrees. And so I sort of got my first job as an industrial designer, and that was at Vert Design, which is one of Australia's best, I guess, industrial design studios. And I stayed there for a very long time. Then I sort of changed roles, went into an in-house role at a startup, then went back to consultancy again, and really tried all these, I guess, various ways of practicing industrial design. And I never specialized in a specific type of tech or anything. I've done everything from, furniture to consumer electronics to like large scale art installations to, I don't know, strategy to material. So I genuinely enjoy experimenting with physical materials and different ways of making to communicate. One thing that sort of stayed always constant in my practice was this idea of having a side project. So I always worked for other people, but I always had my side project. So Milan Design Week, and doing this thing for Dutch Design Week, doing this thing for Vivid. And that was my way of stepping outside of the commercial, I guess, design world and being able to experiment and being able to, be a little bit cheeky with approaching design in a non-structured way. So that's sort of been my, it's been my journey of, I guess, design, and from 2019 I went back to uni as an educator. So I've been teaching at University Art and Design, both in masters and bachelor's degrees in different sort of studio as well as theory subjects. And I guess I figured that that's also something that I really like doing, not as a full time, but one day a week is always dedicated to teaching during term, because that's also my way of reading and investigating further again. So it's a side project. Teaching also became another side project. Um, and yeah, so that's my journey of design. What was the second part of the question? I forgot.
But that's like just that journey in and of itself. So born and raised in Iran,
Yeah,
moved to Australia, and I'm
yeah,
assuming on your own. So
yeah,
that would have been just. I mean, I'm assuming that you were like just completely out of your depth and just going, and predominantly non-English speaking background, I assume.
mm,
So you're coming, and like the Australian culture isn't easy. So you've come into that. You've come into Sydney, which look, I love Sydney. I was born and raised in Sydney, so and I was born and raised in the western suburbs.
yeah,
So a very a very high Middle Eastern background. So I do miss it. I do miss my neighbour always just yelling out on a Sunday afternoon after you smell the charcoal barbecue and everything just been handed over. So
yeah, that's right.
but that was like that's a huge journey in and of itself. But
Mm,
then to come here and just within the design realm, just I guess succeed beyond probably a lot of expectations. Um, but how from that, and product design and industrial design, and you've done fashion and furniture, and so I remember I listened to a documentary years ago, and it was with Mark Newsom,
yeah,
and he was saying a designer should just be able to design. He shouldn't limit themselves to one particular field as many do. And your case in point that it's the process,
yeah.
um, which we'll jump back to in a little while. But I really want to know more about crafted liberation, about how you how that journey started. And for those who don't know what it is, can you'll be able to explain it far better than I.
Yeah, yeah. So, Crafted Liberation started, it was basically kicked off, or the idea was sort of born in 2023. Um, and it was a completely, I guess, self-initiated project. So it wasn't tied to a client, or we never received a brief or anything. I was basically between two jobs. So I finished up my role at the startup, where I was an in-house, I guess, design leader, and I was sort of between that role and my next role, which was at another consultancy. And I think um, so I'm going to give you a lot of different contexts, and then you should hopefully be able to put all of that together, because there's many layers into how it all came about. So I was between two jobs, a little bit of, I guess, a little bit more mental capacity than you would usually have when you're working. Um, Also in 2022, we had the Women Life Freedom movement back in Iran, which was something that really deeply impacted a lot of us, not just Iranian women, but Iranian men and women around the world. And just for, I guess, the audience's context, in case, Women Life Freedom was basically, I guess, a mini almost revolution that happened in Iran as a result of the death of Mahsa Jina Amini, who was detained by this thing that we call the morality police. So if you're walking in Iran, and if you're not wearing your headscarf correctly, and wearing a headscarf, that's a whole different thing. Like, people wear it as an accessory. It's like a beauty. It's a beautiful thing that you wear, and your hair is still out. But sometimes you get caught because you're not wearing it exactly right, and who knows what that right is. But anyway, she was, unfortunately, she passed away while she was detained, and that sort of really triggered this years and years of trauma and I guess unhappiness with the situation in Iran since the revolution in 1979. And so that sort of movement really had an impact on a lot of the people outside of Iran, because we all felt sort of real, I guess, hopeless and real guilty for not being there and not contributing in a meaningful way. We had people, friends and family going on the street protesting with the risk that they might get detained, they might get taken away by voicing their opinion, and we're all feeling like, oh, we're just sitting here by the beautiful, harbor and watching the news, and then going to work and coming back and seeing all this sort of stuff that's going on. So there was this real sense of urge that, hey, like, everyone wanted to do something in their own way. Internet was shut down in Iran, so communication was real difficult. So a lot of people on social media started being really loud about it, posting about it, talking about it, and just making sure that this whole movement, it doesn't die. And I guess for me, this was Crafted Liberation was a bit of a response to that, to what was going on in my life back then. And then the third context, so we had the mental space, we had women, life, freedom, and then the third context was this sort of, I had on a previous client project, I had played with waste textile as a material to use in mass manufacturing, and it was something that I always enjoyed and really sort of liked. And when the stars align, sort of this idea of, hey, I want to do something about this whole women, life, freedom thing. What's a skill that I have? Okay, I'm a designer, I can design. Is there anything that design can do to help with this? And then I thought, oh, headscarf is a symbol of oppression, but also it's a symbol of resistance in Iran, because a lot of women took off their scarves as a way to protest. So they would go on the street, they would take off their scarf, and they would, some would burn it actually in front of the public to protest, and some would just take it off and walk around without. And
That's incredibly brave.
it's incredible. And that's the thing. So you see that, you're like, oh my God, like, you people are doing this, and I'm just, what am I doing in my life? If you start feeling really guilty and you want to help, you want to contribute. And the other thing is, like, as a result of that, if you go to Iran now, in a lot of areas, no one's wearing it anymore, and it's fine. It's sort of like, it's now accepted not to completely wear your headscarf. And it just shows
Wow.
such small, like, even though actions might seem small at the time, they do actually create some sort of an impact. So anyway, so the scarf became a piece of waste textile. Now we have all of this textile. No one wants to wear them. No one wants them. What do? We don't want to put them in landfill. And then all of these different components came together, and I had this idea of, hey, like, let's take these scarves, let's bring all these women who are protesting on board. Some, they don't want to expose their identity, so maybe this donating the scarf becomes a sign of protest. And we sent a call out on Instagram, asked everyone to donate us the unwanted headscarves, and we then had to decide, okay, what do we turn it into? Then the next phase was to then ideate what are the different objects that we can turn the scarves into. And I really wanted to create an object that also symbolizes oppression, to really continue that story. And thinking about a couple of different things, such as a musical instrument, because women are not allowed to sing in public, maybe a mirror, because like a mirror frame, so that it sort of exposes identity, or lots of different things. And then this idea of a chair, a stadium chair, came about, because women are not allowed to go to the stadium in Iran. And also technically, it was really interesting, that material, that composite made from waste textile, it was really interesting to play with in a seed form, because of that historical, fiberglass or carbon fiber that you might use in molded seeds before injection molding was a thing. In early 1900s, before the Eames guys made the injection molded seed, then fiberglass was a form.
Yeah.
Exactly. So now we have, instead of fiber and instead of resin, we're using textile and we're using waste plastic. So we're using these new sort of resources to mimic a historic, I guess, production method. And so we picked stadium seats, and then that's how it all sort of, it just kicked off then. When R&D did all sorts of experimentation, and
that's amazing. I mean, just to hear the journey of the design, of the I guess the technical aspects that you've put in there, but then the history of and going in without a brief.
Yeah.
We love to teach kids. You got to have a design brief. You got to have your criteria. You got to do this. You got to. But to go in and just like, what's got meaning to me? What can I do that's going to affect change?
Yeah.
Um, and then there's that part of it, and then there's the history of what's happening in Iran. Because I mean, in my very muted understanding of the history of Iran, it used to be quite a forward-thinking country
Absolutely.
back in the sort of the 50s, 60s, 70s. And then the political parties changed. A different group got into power,
Yeah.
and then it went back to a very traditional
Yeah.
fundamentalist country.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
That's right. And I guess what you're mentioning there, so that the government changed, but the people didn't change. People still stayed that, forward thinking, creative, expressive. So people are still the same people. It's just that they're now, unfortunately, bound to this new, I guess, control system.
yeah, and that must be real. Like, I mean, I'm born and raised in Australia. I'm a guy who's 50, white. So I tick all those privilege boxes. Um, So which look, I'm very pleased I was born when I was, where I was, and who I am. So look, I'm not complaining, but then when I look and it's just like, geez, I'm super lucky, and I've seen all these things, but look, I'm in Australia, like what are you going to do? Um, but for someone like yourself, you've sort of said, well, this is happening, but you can actually do something even though you're thousands of kilometers away.
Hmm. Yeah.
So with all of that, like what's the most unexpected thing that has come from that whole project?
Yeah. Look, so um, it's interesting because so what you mentioned here is that, yeah, obviously, like, people come from different contexts, and I was born in Iran, but I was also still part of a fairly, I was in a fairly privileged position in Iran that I could, finish my study and then come here as an international student. And then you mentioned sort of your context of being born and raised in Iran. So people come from all different contexts and background, but I think that thing around wanting to this urge of wanting to, I guess, amplify certain stories, or being really loud and being vocal about other people's experiences, even though you may not have experienced them. I think that's something that I really learned through this project. And it was something that, I guess, it was always in my head that, yeah, I like helping people. And part of the reason that I'm a designer, because I actually really like solve problems that people deal with on the day-to-day basis. So I think just really the unexpected thing for me was that I learned that by just visualizing certain experiences in a really tactile way, you can get everyone on board, regardless of what context and where they're from, or what's their story, or how privileged they might be or not, because everyone's got shit in their life. It's not,
Yeah,
doesn't matter where you're from. Yes, some. I'm not. Sort of ignoring what's happening, and certain experiences that people might have, but I think just this mentality of turning that approach of, hey, I'm in Australia. What can I do about this? So I'll just watch and uh, it's not up to me because I haven't experienced it. I think just turning that around into, regardless of where you are, where you're from, what you've experienced, uh, just being really vocal about any issue that doesn't feel right to you. Like, I never experienced domestic violence as a woman, but I absolutely stand with people who have experienced it. And I would, if there's anything I can do, I would absolutely do. So I think, like, for me, crafted liberation was just such a learning that, hey, like, this thing of being really loud about other people's stories, and that actually making a big difference in terms of, like, how people might perceive and how people might live their life, that was a huge learning for me. even though it was something that I felt like I knew, but I really sensed it, because like I did not think that we're going to get this much attention on this project. Like it started as just, hey, like I want to do something, like let's do this art project, and that art project just turned into this like absolute global initiative all of a sudden. So
Yeah,
storytelling is it's huge.
yeah, and I think that's, I mean, you've hit the nail on the head really there. It's the storytelling, it's the getting people to understand
Mm,
and to empathize,
yeah,
and to go, well, look, I might not have any idea about what's happening, but I'm passionate about it,
yeah,
and look, I can actually do something. Because I think so many people, like societally, they
mm,
see a problem, whatever it may be, whether it's homelessness, DV,
yeah,
problems in another country, oppression, cancer, anything that they see as this huge problem. They go, well, I'm just one person. I can't do anything. I'm too small. But we all know that the 1%
so
combined has tremendous effect.
exactly, exactly. And I think empowering people to be able to do that is a I think it's a powerful tool from a designer's perspective, because like we can deal with really unambiguous I guess sorry ambiguous, see I'm forgetting how to speak English. So we can deal with really intangible ambiguous concepts. Like we visualize those things, we tell those stories that never existed. It comes out of hits or is just like abstract. So I think for that reason we are in a very privileged position to tell stories in a certain way that can empower others to then act in a certain way, whatever the problem in front of them is.
Yeah. Oh, that's yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Now, I saw the images of the sporting seats,
Yep.
and they're amazing. And look, being understand, like we teach kids about sustainable design, and the fashion industry is one of those the biggest
Yeah.
textile waste, like in most industries. I mean, it's just there's so much goes in because of fast fashion and things like that. But how did you balance the the object and the beauty, and then still crafting that, I guess it would have been a really fine line to thread the political message behind it without any of it getting lost.
Yeah. Look, I think honestly, like I didn't plan. I didn't plan for it. So the key to the effectiveness of this project is really the simplicity of the object. It's a chair and it's made from a certain material. That's it. It's really simple. Everyone knows about it. Everyone can identify it, recognize it. So it's just very clear. When you look at it, you exactly understand the layers. And I really didn't plan. I mean, yeah, I mean, I never thought, okay, let's do it this way because it's simple. It somehow things just folded into like they just
Just a serendipitous project.
yeah, it fell into place. And I think the thing is, I think the choice of the seat was really the right thing to do. Just in that moment, I was only thinking of an object that symbolizes, oppression, and we're not allowed to go to the stadium. But actually, the idea of everyone has a seat, the idea of a stadium seat being an object that brings people together and it unifies, and it's people come to celebrate something using these seats. I think these were things that I didn't necessarily think about initially, but actually had a big impact on the perception and the effectiveness of the message. Um, but I do think one of the other, I guess, effective aspects is that material culture. So using physical, tactile materials, which you can touch and really feel firsthand, uh, to to then amplify a certain story. And in this case, like scarf is it's a fashion item, and it's the scarves that we received were absolutely gorgeous, like these colorful, beautiful patterns, like stunning pieces of fabric that are used as an accessory in Iran, and now we're turning them into a seat. So that beauty was carried into the object, and I think yeah. But at the end of the day, the effectiveness was really into the simplicity, because people could see this, touch it, sit on it, and interact with it, and they understand what it is. It does
Yeah,
tell it's not it doesn't have these multiple layers of communication. very direct.
Yeah, and I guess that's probably what makes it so powerful, because it's just, here
So
it is.
yeah,
This is what I'm saying, and
exactly. Like you just can't find a just can't find a fault in it. Like it's exactly this is it.
and I mean it has. I mean, if we remove the political aspect of it, just the technical side of things in manufacturing it, and the minimization of waste.
Yeah,
I mean, if we look at, let's just say, some of the high level sporting clubs. I mean, they have stadiums that are getting seats replaced constantly.
yeah,
They're constantly replacing their uniforms. It could be a way to actually start to go, hold on, you guys need to be a little bit responsible. Let's start giving back, and let's start making these so that we're not using all these new materials, these new plastics, and actually starting to be socially responsible and sustainable in your design practice.
yeah, exactly. So what you just said is our next step with this project, basically, to then go to these different institutions and actually showcase them, crafted liberation as a case study. Not that we're gonna put the seats made from headscarves in stadiums, might with the with women collectively, but also there's an opportunity to actually use any textile that tells any story. So taking away that idea of material storytelling and material culture to communicate, and to sort of build communities around. And I think like for state sport stadiums and leagues generally, like community is such a huge part of them. Like this
Oh yeah,
the community of athletes, but the community around them, the supporters, their fans. So you can really build layers and layers of, I guess, engagement depending on how you approach it. So next step is to, I guess, unpack that a bit more.
absolutely. Yeah, I think you'll probably need a few more spare days than just one a week for that one.
Oh yes, yeah, that's
Like that's an amazing journey and an amazing product, and that's, again, that's what drew me to
mm,
really contact you, just to get the background and the story and the understanding of it, and to hear the journey of it.
yeah,
um but as a design educator,
yeah,
and you follow, and these questions will basically make sense to everyone else who's sort of listening, in the sense of it's sort of, um it's like backfilling all the questions and all the stuff that we've just talked about is with a design process.
mm,
So we all follow a design process. We teach a design process. Some, there's all variants, but it's all very similar.
yeah.
But from starting your career and starting your education as a design student, and then into your first work, um, did you start with a philosophy, or did you build one, and has that evolved or changed, for the principles that you design with?
Mm. Look, I think, looking back, so let's start from like literally graduation. Um, the design process, obviously, like you learn at design at art school or at design school, like yes, this is the process you follow, and then you go into a job and you put those in practice. I think the first couple of years, of my career was really just finding out, trying lots of different things, and I was lucky to be given, the platform to try lots of different things, and then figuring out what I'm actually interested in, what I'm good at, what can I sort of make money from, and what is it that sort of fuels my creativity. So there's like four things, or I guess different questions that were answered, at different times. And so the first couple of years was all about learning, like really just trying anything that I'm given, I'll go for it. Like one project would be project management, and one project would be craft, glass blowing, one project would be like real consumer electronic, like commercial. So I tried all those different things, and I figured after a couple of years that I'm interested in certain types of projects. So I'm interested in anything that really involves people. So projects that are not necessary. Sometimes like those projects are not classical industrial design projects. Like anything that requires a lot of co-design, anything where I need to manage lots of stakeholders, anything that's slightly outside of the norm of, that define, what is it? Discover, define, develop, design, the double diamond. I
Yeah.
I I really sort of enjoyed those types of projects. So like doing design thinking exercises or going and experimenting with the material, which you can't quite fit into the commercial industrial design narrative, but they still really feed into good commercial success. So material innovation was something that I really became sort of interested in. So playing with different materials, playing with waste, adaptive reuse of materials. How can we, if we take this unwanted, let's not call it waste, let's just call it an unwanted material in this case. Now let's change the case, take it to this other area and see how we can use it. That was something that I became really interested in. And I guess I also managed to, like, throughout the years, but I managed to build a bit of dexterity around design process, so I can still do those traditional, sort of commercial design projects. And that, to be honest, that is still the bread and butter. That's what pays.
You got to pay the bills, don't you?
That's what pays the bills. So, we have Crafted Liberation, obviously, is a big project for us now, but RK Collective, we're a sort of a product design collective, and we still take on industrial design projects. But what RK stands for is really designing for sustainability, designing for social impact. So we've narrowed down our design approach into briefs that have a sustainability or social impact element in them. And that's sort of how we, I guess, refined or finessed our practice a bit more and focused it on circular economy.
Yeah, and that's so important. So I mean, we look at the waste management, and we look at fast food, fast fashion, we look at automotive. The waste is just everywhere. And yeah, we need designers, we need companies to actually start looking to designers like yourself and your team to go, let's look at this forget waste. And look at, I like what you said. It's not waste. It's just something can be used. It's just not wanted. And I mean, I know that there's a lot of European companies, some major corporations that have really factored that in with using some of their waste to generate heat to heat their tooling or their factories. That they anything that is made comes back to the factories, recycled and put back into the product. So it's slowly gaining momentum, but I think industry in general still has a long way to go, because we know it's always cheaper to manufacture something new than it is to recycle and reuse.
That's it. And I think there's one thing to, obviously, like, managing waste and reusing material is a very important aspect of how we sort of practice. But there's another thing to design in a way that thing doesn't really reaches the waste stage. So if something is waste after a year, well, there are some bad design decisions that were made that, either the thing broke or it's just designed for very temporary use with materials that are not suitable. So if it's designed for temporary use, the material shouldn't stay in our nature for hundreds of years. It should be a material that can decompose really easily. So I think just materials are materials, but like picking them for the right applications or designing in a way that the life cycle stays, circular, as we all read about it these days, so that, it doesn't just go to landfill, but actually you can extend its life, you can repair it, you can disassemble it, turn it into, like, remanufacture it, and so on and so forth. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for this type of, like, with design focused on these specific principles. And I think now we're at a sort of stage that there are not many. I mean, there's a lot of people individually wanting to do the right thing, and I think just having a practice focused solely on that, I think I see a lot of good opportunities in that.
Yeah, because we all we know that. I mean, design and a lot of commercial design, it's about making money. It's about getting a product to market, getting consumers to buy it, and then they're done with it. And we know that. I mean, I read an article recently, maybe you read it also, but the amount of e-waste that Australia is about to produce is just astronomical. But the companies behind that Go, well, we're designing them to be used up in 3 years. We want people to keep buying them, but
Yeah,
they're not offering any solution for the waste.
yeah.
So do you think perhaps in the design, or like, and this is sort of a very much an ethereal question, and I guess we can answer it, but we can't solve the problem. But do you think some of these companies should be held to a higher standard or more responsible for how they design and dispose of their products?
Oh, absolutely. And the reason we haven't, so what you've just described is our capitalist economic system, like that we live in a capitalist world, and it's the nature of our I guess the economic system that we live in, that it's things are consumed in a very linear way and in a very fast way for profits. And yes, absolutely, those companies should be held accountable. And the reason nothing has happened yet because there hasn't been legislation, but there are legislation coming, starting from Europe. There's a lot of, Europe now has a lot of measures around responsible production, responsible manufacturing. You actually need to show how you're making progress. You need to show your impact. You will get measured against how repairable your things are. So there will be more and more, and I think until we have like proper legislations in place, it'd be very hard to convince a large corporation to spend more money and take more risk for just for being more circular or sustainable. Yes, everyone wants to do the right thing, but if we live in in a capitalist ecosystem,
Everyone wants to make money.
that's it exactly. So I think, but I do think there are a lot of really good legislations and sort of frameworks coming out, and there's more and more, I guess, like the most basic form, like we see the impact of climate change, like we do actually see how the rising temperatures, we do actually see the physical impact of this, of what's happening to earth. So I think people are now, everyone's becoming more aware of it, and consumers are questioning it as well. So I absolutely see a day where if you're not showing that how you're contributing positively to climate change, your consumers are not going to actually stay loyal to you and buy your products.
Yeah,
But it does require, it's not really just a design question. Design is a part of it, but this it's a policy, and it's sort of like a everyone question, really, is it?
yeah, definitely, definitely. And I mean, we could go down a whole, we could spend a couple of hours just talking about that side of
Yeah,
of design and the ethics and behind design. Um,
exactly.
but with that, well, we're talking about change and responsibility and legislation. But what are some of the changes that you're seeing? Because you're on the ground level of the design industry, like
Yeah,
you're in the coal face of it.
yeah.
What are some of the things that you're seeing in the industry that are exciting you, and like how are they, and are you adapting your approach to design with these changes that are coming in?
Yeah, so I think what I, the first thing that I'm really excited about and I see is a multidisciplinary approach to design. So I guess, like looking back at the history of design, we had these very distinct separate disciplines. Like you're an architect, you're an industrial designer, you're a graphic designer, like you're this. And there's this like clear labeling and clear grouping, and each group would work on their own and do their thing. And it's still, you still have that to a sense, but I think the approach to design is becoming a lot more multidisciplinary. So you see a lot more projects where different disciplines coming together, and not just different disciplines of design, but also like other disciplines, science, engineering, policymakers, they're coming together to approach a project. And I think that's just so much more effective and powerful in terms of the caliber of thinking that you can bring to the table. So that sort of approach of, yeah, multidisciplinary is something that I'm excited about and I'd love to practice. And I think that's partially the reason we called our sort of new venture a collective and not so much a design studio or a design consultancy, because we really want to reinforce this notion of collectivism and this idea of assembling the right teams for the right projects depending on what's needed. Um, but also, designers are becoming a lot more aware of their social impact. So design is becoming less about technical gadgets, but more about the human and the emotion and the relationships between objects and people and place. That's again something that's exciting for me, and I'd love to explore more in my practice, especially that idea of the relationships between components and between artifacts and humans. I think that can, not that it only has good social impact, but it can also increase sustainability because people love their things more, people love their places more, they care for them for longer. And yeah, I think the other trends that you see are just the new tools that we can work with as designers, uh, such as AI in design. That to me is a little bit scary still. Scary in a sense that, so I think we do, I at least acknowledge that they're great for efficiency, but you do need to have good control of them. I can see a scenario where you just get these masses of output without that much depth and content. And that's where I see could be a little bit dangerous, but who knows? It's very new. I don't know. But it's definitely a trend. And I think if it's used well, it could be revolutionary in terms of you have more space to think deeply rather than spending hundreds of hours on a render or something.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Like I use it in the classroom, like with my high school students,
Yeah,
to
great.
a little bit, and I'm very careful of how I use it with them, because I want their designs, I want their thoughts, I want their emotions in the design,
Yeah,
and some of these tools are great for efficiency. Like, I'd rather get them, and the way they can interpret some of the sketches from these students and convert them into a really nice render
yeah,
is great. And then they get them to, you obviously you got to put your sketch in, but you've got to tell it, you've got to give it a bit of a story. So it's also then helping them with their creative thought and the
yeah,
words that they need to use and the way they have to convey their message. So yeah, it's one of those things that's going to be really good if it's used correctly, and if it's used to enhance our thought and our creative process, not the other way around.
exactly. And I think, like yourself or other people who are experienced in the industry, like you have years of experience where it allows you to control the output, and you know exactly what you want. But there's also a scenario, and this is like when we were learning CAD, for instance, like SolidWorks. Sometimes the CAD drives your design. You're not driving the CAD if you're a young junior designer. And I see like almost the same thing where the AI is driving your thoughts rather than you having control over it. And that's, I think, the I guess uncertainty that I talk about is mainly with like younger designers where they still don't have that level of sort of experience or knowledge to know, okay, like where to use, but that like any other new technology, right? Like when we had the internet or when CAD came about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and you see the rapid changes in CAD. Like, so for what it's doing now, for
Mm.
what it is when I first started, you know. But even then, as bad, like as clunky as it was revolutionary. But
Yeah.
then you had all the draftsmen and engineers and guys going, no, you can't use that. That's terrible. It's
Yeah.
you and so now it's with AI. But again, like you said, my experience, your experience as an educator, as a designer,
Mm.
we know our content, we know
Yeah.
what we need to do, and yeah, I have that concern with a number of the young teachers coming through, like the the ability for artificial intelligence to generate work is great.
Mm.
It's great for reducing man hours, taking stress, taking mental workload off them. But the difference between a first year teacher and myself is
Mm.
I really, like, I have a thorough understanding of the content. So
Yeah.
when it spits out rubbish, I actually know what the rubbish is.
Exactly. Exactly.
So yeah, we've got to try and it's a juggling act, isn't it, to try and pass
Exactly.
on that generational knowledge to the new guys coming through, and
That's
then
it.
they can show us all the tips and tricks so that we can work like your collective
Yeah.
to get the best item out there possible.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Now, you mentioned design thinking
Mm.
before. and you talk about, you're talking about relationship and bringing people and stakeholders.
Yeah.
But how would you, to Joe off the street, how would you explain to them what what design thinking is? Because it's starting to make inroads into business, and other fields that often aren't associated with design thinking, but they're starting to see the benefits of it. So how would you explain what design thinking is?
Yeah, look, I think so. Design thinking is the term that IDEO sort of formalized early 2000s, right? I think so. Designers have been following this process for years, even before design thinking was a thing. It's
Yep.
just the process of designing, which starts with understanding human needs, then ideation, then development, and sort of that process of going really broad and then coming back and broad. So every designer has been doing that mostly, and IDEO, I think, really sort of formalized that process into something that's documented and sellable and explainable, and can be used by other teams to to create innovative ideas and outcomes. Excuse me. I think and I do see the benefit. I mean, I don't know if I can say this because I might get in trouble. I do see the benefit of it in being used in corporations when it's used and driven by the right people. So I think even though design thinking is now sold as a process, you still need designers and you still need people who naturally have this ability to empathize and understand other people and understand what the right problem to solve is to drive that design thinking. So you can't
Yeah.
just team in a big bank and say, "Hey, let's do a sprint," and then come up with ideas. It just never works.
No,
And
you've got to understand how to ask the right question.
exactly. And a lot of we say design is about problem solving, yes, but actually design is first about problem framing. Like, what is the problem that we're trying to solve? A lot of the times, even with client work, a lot of the times client comes to you with a perceived a problem they've identified that they want a solution for, but sometimes there are a lot of precedents where actually that problem wasn't framed in the right way. The problem is something else, and you realize that by really immersing yourself and talking to the people who may have that problem and understanding that, oh yeah, actually, yes, we're looking in the right area, but we're framing the problem incorrectly. And I
Yeah.
think what designers are really good at for problem framing, and it's a fundamental skill that really I don't think can be taught. I think you need to just have that the mentality and the thinking to be able to do that, and then it becomes about problem solving. So first is what's the right thing to do, and then how do we do it right? How do we then
Yeah.
solve it in the right way? um so I think design thinking is just embedded it's so deeply embedded in any designer's process that it almost sometimes to me it feels like design think, yeah, of course, how else would you do something, how.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. And I mean, I see it in education. It's just like
Yeah,
they bring it in. It's just like, well, that's what I've been doing for years and years and years. It's just, it's a natural progression. I look at, I mean, I'm an empathic person anyway. So I always look to, okay, well, what's the lens you're coming at? Like, what's your experience? How can I help you understand the problem that we're trying to solve?
exactly.
So now, using all that, like reframing the question, talking to the client,
Mm,
do you have any sort of, how do you, I guess, act on their questions, their feedback without bringing, because we all have a natural bias.
yeah,
But how do you act on what they do, or what are some tools that you might use to stop you as a designer going, I can see how to solve this problem, but it's
yeah.
not my problem to solve? How do you help those act on their problems and come up with the right questions and solutions without putting your biasy on them?
When working with clients,
Yeah.
look, so I think in a commercial design project, you always look like for a product or for a commercial design project to succeed, you need to really solve the right and honest human problem. Like a lot of the times projects don't succeed because actually the problem that we were looking at wasn't necessarily the right thing. But so that's I guess the desirability of your project. But then there's another aspect to a design project where the way you're solving the problem, it really needs to suit your client's sort of business model, and it needs to sort of suit how, if they can deliver it, if they have the capacity. So it's not always just, it is always how do I say, it's about solving the problem for the human that you're designing for, but also it's about solving the problem in a way that your client can then take forward and build a business off. So there's that, the desirability, I guess, feasibility and viability framework. And now we add a fourth aspect, responsibility, that
Yeah.
comes. So keeping that in mind, I think is pretty important. But going back to biases, like we're humans, we're mammals, we have cognitive biases, and I think being really comfortable with uncertainty, and just at the start of the project, just pretending that I know absolutely nothing about this thing that's in front of me, and really what we call suspending disbelief, and putting yourself in that sort of suspension area where you're now absorbing like information from like with a really fresh point of view, and making sure that you can then stay objective by also asking the people that are involved in your design projects, or your users, making sure you have enough data, both quantitative and qualitative, that can really validate every decision that you make as a designer. So decisions are never made based on how I feel or like what I want, but it's actually based on what someone needs, what my client needs, what are the manufacturing constraints, what ecosystem are we dealing with, identities, cultures, like all of those sort of come into play, but not mine, the other, the users.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing. I like that suspended disbelief. I like that. Yeah.
Did
I'll have to bring that one into the classroom. Um, Now, I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours, but look, I want to be respectful of your time. And, you're in Sydney. It's getting a little late, but I've got just a couple more questions if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course.
The last one, I guess on design is, I mean, we teach. Oh, I mean, the way I teach, anyways, I teach that my classroom is a safe space to fail.
Yeah.
So even if the design doesn't work, it can still be a success if you've learnt something from it.
Yeah.
So is there an example of a failure that you've had that has actually led to a success?
Oh, everything. One project that we didn't have failures, Phil. Look, there is absolutely no way. I mean, unless if you're like born and bred genius, there's no way that you go through the design process without failing. And that, like, as exactly as you said, like that failing fuels the next step, and that's your prototyping, testing, refining phase. So you have to fail, and then you have to improve, like learn and improve, because otherwise you're just stalling the first step. um, so the thing that I can think of immediately, so I guess a current project where we went through cycles of design, like concept development, refinement, prototyping, and we almost got to the point that we wanted to do everything. So we ended up designing this thing that really just, it was almost like a Swiss Army knife, and had all these things, all these flexibilities. And we got to that point just before going to prototype. We're like, hang on, this just doesn't feel right. And we did with the client, like had the workshop, and just like absolutely stripped back everything, like all those things that we were trying to fit into the solution, and then said, actually, like if we take 3 steps back, we're in a much better position. Like we're just trying to do everything in one thing. And we ended up doing that, and the outcome was this like really beautiful, simple, elegant product. And it's still, in progress. I can't say exactly what it is, but it's like a homeware piece. with inclusive design in mind. So homeware piece, which is a mobility aid as well. And we now we're prototyping this like really understandable, simple, and sort of effective solution that really works for everyone without wanting to have all those things. I think like that's one that I can think about because it was recent, and I think we were just so, because of the user group that we're working with, and I think we surveyed like more than 200 people to really get down to what we need to do. But we got into this point that we thought, okay, we have to like have this ultimate flexibility at the cost of like breaking a lot of other things.
Yep.
And I think like that I'm really glad that we had that moment of just stopping and saying, hey, like just there's something about this that doesn't feel right. Like I don't think this is going to work. And we stripped it back, and now we're doing another round of prototyping. But design is all about like those failures are actually how it's almost like a step you take to go further.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
that's also, I love that. Yeah, there's not been a project where you haven't had a failure of some sort. But again, it drives you to come up with a more viable solution or the best solution for the client. But
That's
you're following the process, the design thinking, the ideation, the refinement, the evaluation. Yeah,
that,
all those things that us designers love.
and to be honest, like if there's no failure, if everything's working, you start to question like, is something wrong? Like things shouldn't go this much
It
smoothly.
shouldn't go this smoothly. Yeah. Yeah, like I've behind me is my workbench, I'm in my garage, my studio,
Yeah,
and I've got a project that's been sitting on my bench. It's a light. It's full of reclaimed components,
yeah,
but I just haven't got it right yet. It's been bugging me, and I've got various components from around the house that I've got into it, and it's working, but it's just like, I can't finish it yet. So I'll put it on the back burner and I'll come to it later. But it's just that it's failed, but I want it to work
yeah. It will work at the right time.
at the right time. Now,
Yeah.
just the last few questions, and these are a little bit, these not so much design and the theory of design, but it's more about, some a little bit more personal with you is, and some of the thinking processes is, and again, these are just short, sharp answers, so that it has,
Oh,
just because again, you've been speaking to me for an hour, and I'm so grateful for that. But what is there a quote, a mantra, something that you hold on to that's, I guess, in a just throughout, whether it's personal or professional, just something that sits with you and resonates with you every day, sort of thing.
look, I have a whole book of quotes because I never remember them and I have to go and read them. But I mean, um, I'm just really bad at remembering exactly quotes, but I remember the thought process behind it. Recently, I read a book which I can recommend, and there are a lot of quotes in there. But I read a book called "Design as an Attitude" by Alice. Again, names potentially a bit dyslexic. Alice Hawthorne, I think. Design as an Attitude. Sorry, Alice Rawsthorne, not Hawthorne. Design as an Attitude, and she basically really so she talks about almost taking a step back from treating design as this commodity. I mean, it has to be commercial, but sort of really having the attitude of design, which is sort of goes back to this idea of design thinking. So this design-led mentality that the problems that you see are opportunities, the failures are actually part of the process, and really being comfortable with those things to then address much more complex issues in our world. So that's something that it's really sort of front of mind, and I keep going back to, and it's full of just really amazing case studies that of different things that people have done in different disciplines of design, from architecture all the way to graphic design and service design. And I think it really describes the changing nature of the design practice from being really technical and commodity and artifact led, either digital or physical artifact, to actually a way of living and practicing being a human.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the title says it all. It's design,
Design
design as an attitude. Yeah,
Yeah, it's a
yeah,
really book, and it's like really easy to digest. So I very
Oh,
much recommend it to
well,
everyone.
definitely on my reading list now. So
Yeah.
the other thing is, do you have a? I mean, we've spoken about some of the products that you've designed, and the thing that led us to this conversation, and sort of the challenges and the things that led to that. But do you have it could be really simple, it could be really complex, it could just be, just something ethereal. But do you have a challenge out that you could put out for our listeners to do or to think about, or just, a question that they need to think rather than just go, oh yeah, well,
Um, a challenge, a thing to think about. I would say try to design anything, or try to implement design for a scenario that you've never been in, you've never experienced. Try to I think like set yourself a challenge, set yourself a brief, and try to design, and whatever that design response is, depending on your way of designing and your discipline, respond to a challenge or a scenario where you absolutely never experienced as a human, but you know it exists, and you're read about it, in the news or in media, or it's something that someone else might have experienced. But really try to set yourself a challenge to design for that, and really try to understand, like, see what the process of understanding an experience that you've never had is, beyond just reading about it, but actually, like, what does immersing yourself in a problem actually mean? I think uh,
yeah,
that's I think that's something that I would probably put out there as a challenge. And it's something, like, to be honest, I myself, I don't think I have uh, sort of a way to do that, but I just think it's almost like it's a bit of a muscle training, right? The more you put yourself in that situation, the better, like, your muscle training empathy and being in the shoes of people and experiences that you've absolutely never ever encountered.
yeah, absolutely. The empathy behind it can only make either the product or the process better, but also, being a more empathetic person makes you better, and it
Yeah,
makes society better because we can start to look at each other in a much better light.
exactly. That's exactly right. And with less bias, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. Now the one now it wouldn't be the Tattoo Teacher podcast without asking you, Neela, do you have any tattoos?
I don't have any tattoos. No. It's like, it's interesting because, like, we always talk about getting tattoos, and I just cannot commit to a permanent mark. I don't know
that
why.
that that's the response that so many people give it. And look, it's a big commitment because once they're in, like they're a lot harder to get rid of than they are to get.
Yeah, and I wonder, like, it's just my way of approaching even design or anything in life. Like, I can't, even with design, I can't commit to, like, one thing and say, hey, this is my process or this is my industry. Like, I just want to have everything, or I want to experiment everything. And I'm worried that, like, if I commit and then that's it, like, that's my mark that I've made.
Yep, no,
I,
100%.
I've been thinking about a circle. Maybe I'll go get a circle somewhere. I don't know.
Absolutely. No, I 100% get it. Like with all the ones that I have, everything's got a meaning behind it.
That,
And but I fully understand why people are like,
yeah,
because it's a permanent thing. It's there for, well, it's not there for life because you can, get rid of them. But yeah, it's a big risk, especially for,
I do really love the subculture though. And I've actually got a really good book which is all about the tattoo subculture in the Marine. And I think it's fascinating. I really love the stories and, like, actually the culture and the thinking behind it. So
yeah. Oh, the some of those early artists, the Ed Hardys and guys like that who brought about. But even earlier than that, you look at the Pacific Island and the
yeah,
various tribal tattoos around the world. Like, just the stories that they tell are amazing.
yeah, 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 absolutely. In Iran, I think in west of Iran, like in the Kurdish region and also south, there's a big sort of folk culture around tattoos, and like you see old women, like literally 90-year-old with certain tattoos like on their face or something, and it's a whole world behind it.
Wow. That's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Now, last but certainly not least,
Yes.
if people would like to get in contact with you, what's the best way to? I'll put these. I'll put these in the show notes as well. But what's the best way to reach out to you if they want to either find more about your designs, actually get in contact with you, maybe even hire you for a project?
Yeah. So two things there. First, I would ask our audience to go to Instagram and look at crafted_liberation, our project Instagram page. So that's basically where we started the whole project. So that's where the call out happened. That's how people got engaged. That's how we tell our stories as well. So we sort of captured a lot of the women's, but also our manufacturers' stories, and we sort of use that platform as a way to document. So first thing would be to go on Instagram and follow our page and also reach out there, or our website, which is www.rk-collective.com. And there we will have our email and contact details.
Brilliant. I'll definitely put those in the show notes for everyone who's listening.
Thank you.
But Nila, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you. I appreciate your time. I appreciate all that you've done for the design field, and that you'll continue to do in inspiring and lifting up new designers and making people aware of things that are just happening that they need to be aware of.
Thank you. Thanks for having me tonight.
It was all my pleasure, 100%.
Cheers. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thank you so much for listening to the Tattoo Teacher podcast. I hope you enjoyed the conversation and found it insightful. If you like what you heard, it would mean so much to me if you could either like, follow, and subscribe to whatever platform you are listening on. The music was by DJ Fruit Salad. Thanks again for listening. Stay cool. Be blessed.